Welcome to another video about Reflexis Flow. Today I'd like to start a series about how to write your own parts for our platform. Obviously our platform comes with quite a toolkit, quite a collection of what we call standard parts, but you'll find that writing your own parts can be a really easy and easy way to extend the capabilities of our platform and to ease development of whatever it is you'd like to build. Obviously there's a lot of ground to cover, so there's going to be a series of videos, and we'll start easy and basically build things from there. So I expect there will be probably 3 or 4 videos, maybe more, depending on what it is people are interested in, obviously. And well, we'll see how it goes. So what I decided to do is actually take something that we're working on right now, which is the project that the web application that we're looking at here, and write one of the parts that need to be written for our project, for this product. I'm not going to show you the web application itself, because that's not what this session is all about. But I'll briefly explain what it is I need to build, and you can then watch me build this particular project-specific part. So in the system we have something that we call customers. Customers are basically organizations. These are just 2 dummy organizations that my colleague put in here. And if you select an organization and then edit that organization, what you see is that the organization has a name and possibly a code, but it can have different properties as well. So in this case, these are all dummy properties. So it says sector, which is an enumeration value, location, which can be any text, level, which is a number, and grade, which is a number. And basically what this says is that all the organizations belonging to this organization can have properties assigned to them. And what we need to do is create a part that displays these properties for organizations, and we actually want the same part also to be able to edit these properties. So my colleague has actually prepared this particular flow. So I think if I go here, yes, and then look at the organizational tree, then you see that this is the top organization. There are several sub-organizations and smaller organizations below that. And here needs to be a viewer for the properties. And like I said, we also need something to edit these properties. So if I go here, which is another flow step, we need a part that allows the user to change any properties that were assigned to these organizations. So, and basically that's not all, because as you could see here, there's also a definition of the properties that can be assigned. So there's and I probably I can show you here just briefly. It's because it's not about this flow, but it's about what I need to write. It's about, and here you can see we have some metadata in the system that tells me this particular organization and all the organizations below it can have any of these 4 properties assigned to them. So, and the part that I need to write actually needs to look at this definition and then come up with the right user interface for this definition. So in this case, because there are 4 properties, that it needs to display 4 properties in viewer mode. And for the editor, that there needs to be, 4 fields or user interface elements that allow me to change these 4 particular properties. So not 5, not 2, but these particular 4. So the part that I need to write is basically a data-driven part that needs to be both a viewer and an editor, and we need to be able to switch that. So that's what I need to do. So let's get to it. So when you need to write some code for Reflexis Flow, probably, especially for parts that are interactive and need to perform a particular role in your web application. It's usually a good idea to start small. I could fire up the editor and build, write lines and lines and lines of code. But if you're not entirely sure of what the part should do or how it should do it, it's usually a good idea to start really, really, really small and simply build it incrementally while you test it. So that's what I'm going to do. So the first thing that you need to come up with is the name for the part. So in this case, we already have a folder holding the project specific part. So this is my instance. This should look familiar to you if you've already done something with Flow as a developer. And then you should also know that all the parts go under lib task. So lib task. And here is the folder that holds the existing all the parts that we've already created for this project. So let's call our new part the editor. Well, it's both a viewer and an editor, but the editor part is probably the more important function. So let's call it editor and load it up. Let's see, I've already opened the flow here. I should probably make this a bit larger so it's easier for you to read. Let's fold this. Right, so the smallest part that you can write is basically this. Like I said, it's so this is a part that does absolutely nothing. Obviously, it's basically an empty table without any method. So it's an object with no methods whatsoever. But so a good way to build it is to simply put it in your flow and see how things go. So let's move back to what we saw. So here's the definition, and here is where the part needs to go. Something that we often do is put the name of the flow step in the page, so it's always easy to see where we are. So actually the part needs to go here. So let's put it there. So this is the step show organizations. Show organizations. Whoop. Let's and let's see here. Well, let's call it viewer or props. Obviously we then need to add the part, so this is the quickest way to do it, I think. And we basically named it editor in the RM folder. RM stands for research monitor, which is the product we're building at the moment. And well, let's sync the flow. I should maybe set this up a bit differently, like this, and make this a bit larger. So here it is. I've basically added a very small part to the existing flow. Let's see what it does. I refresh the page and our demo text is gone and there's nothing there. So let's see if we can get something to appear here. Because this is the part that needs to add something to the page. The way to do this is to add a oops, oh, sorry about that. Add a part method, and in this case this is the method that you need to add. Let's try this one. Let's compile. Well, it compiles okay, so it must be good. Press F5. And here's our text. So the part's slowly coming alive. It does virtually nothing, but it does something, which is good. So let's see what it is that we really needed to do. Like I said, somewhere in the system there's a definition that tells me all the properties that can be assigned to this organization. And I should have a look at where that is stored in the session. Here, this is the one, customer properties, I think. And organization properties holds the actual property. So customer properties, well, we can have a look at the session itself. Yes, here it is. So customer properties is basically an array holding the property definitions. And that's something that we need to read for our part to do its thing. So I can see, if I highlight role here, there's an enumeration called sector, there's a text property called location, a number property called niveau, level, and another number property called grade. And well, we can try and read this definition from the session context and do something with it. So let's try that. So I'm going to scrap this, and I want to access the property definition data that's inside the session. So this is one way to go about this. You can use the get function to read, well, pretty much anything, but especially to read stuff from your session context. So obviously I also need to specify where in the session context my definition is stored. So one way to go about it would be to simply type it like this. But that would be really stupid. Why? Because then this part would always require the definition to be in this location, and that's not what we want. So we don't want a hardwired context location. We want it defined. So let's do it like this. And let's check if what we get is actually a table. So for our purposes, we'll simply say, oh, if it's not a table, then it's not interesting, and we'll call it quits. But if we do find the table, a good way to build the part is simply to maybe print the stuff that we see. So what I could do is, well, we're reading properties. So I could, for instance, say let's print a simple list. Why is this not working? There. Let's build a simple list and print out the names and the roles of the properties, because in our session we could see all the properties have names and roles, and these are pretty much the most interesting parts. So we can sorry about that. We can have a property name here and something like this, and add this one here. Let's compile. I'm not using variable p, but that's okay. Let's refresh the page and press F5. Oops, something goes wrong. Bad argument to iPair, stable expected. Yes. So what I've done here, I've basically said, well, get me from the context the definition of the properties, but obviously this part in our particular flow did not have its definition property set yet. So I need to add that here. I'm saying the definition for you, for this particular instance, is customer properties. So let's synchronize the flow. Go back here, press F5, and nothing happens again. Okay, let's see what's going on. Customer properties, that is the location. I should probably put a bookmark here. Let's inspect our oh, yeah, sorry. Refresh the page, and here we are. So it's not doing what we needed to do, but that was not my intention. I'm just showing you that we're slowly putting the puzzle pieces together, and as you can see, the part is already making sense of the definition. It's actually accessing the metadata, and now obviously it should use this metadata to render the actual data, the actual properties. But once again, I'm building it up slowly, so I can actually figure things out as I go along. And obviously it also makes it easier for you to see what's happening. Excuse me. I should probably apologize for my voice. I fell ill about a fortnight ago, and my voice has actually been missing for about right up till now. So I apologize if I'm a bit harder to understand and I don't sound my usual self. Okay. For the next step, we want to have the actual properties displayed, and not so we want to display the data, not the metadata. And we already saw in the session, let's go there, here, that there are some organizational properties defined, so it's called organization properties. So, and there's one of these properties already assigned in the system. So what we need to do is actually tell this part where the data is. So I've synchronized the flow, and let's do something with it. So like I access the metadata here, I can obviously also now access the actual data. Well, let's call it data or properties. And so what we assume is that the values, the properties is a table. So if it's not, then we'll fall back and just assume that there are, and we're starting out very cleanly. So what I now need to do is rewrite this bit, because for each of the properties here, I want definition of properties here, I want to display the correct value. So what I could do is well, something like this. Property name, property role. The value is values property name, and then we could do so. Well, value. Why not? Let's see. It compiles. Refresh the page, and this is something that we recognize from the session context that we inspected earlier. Just thinking about it, a list is probably not the nicest way to render this, because it's not nicely aligned. So let's adjust that. Oops, right. No. And then we could put the property name in a separate, key span, for instance. and have the value in its own span. Oh, that kind of makes sense, I think. Okay, keeps complaining about this one, so let's take that one out. Let's see what happens. Okay, so this actually looks a bit worse than it did previously, but fear not, this is something that we can easily fix by coming up with some suitable CSS. So I could open the. It's usually a good idea to check the structure of whatever it is you're generating. So in this case, as you can see, I've added a div which holds prop divs, which each hold a key span and a value span. And it's probably a good idea to give the container div a class as well, so we can scope this. And actually, what we tend to do is make it easy for people who use parts to add their own classes to parts, because this allows them to restyle stuff. So what I'm going to do, excuse me, is say class is self class and default class, and then add this. Now I just need to the default class here. So the part is called RM editor, so we could, for instance, use this as a default class. So let's compile. So press F5. Nothing changes here, but as you can see, this extra class appears here, and that allows me to, let's close this one here, to go to the CSS, open that one up. Oh, it keeps resetting the font size, annoying. Let's see. Well, let's put it near the bottom here. So what we want to do is, let's see, make sure that the key spans align, and maybe, you know, highlight it a bit. So so we could say minimum width is, well, what would be good? Color, let's go for orange. Obviously it doesn't make sense, but I should probably add this as well for this one to be effective. Right, let's see what's going on. Wow, the orange is a bit much, so let's change it to green. So it's not the right kind of green, but this is basically just to show you how to go about this. So it's not really about the styling, but it's about figuring out how to create the right structure so you can style stuff. And as you can see, this is just, you know, really a matter of minutes to come up with something, you know, somewhat decent. Obviously now we have this, you can for instance you know, play around with the spacing. So it would probably be good. Well, yeah, yeah. To add a little bit of margin. So, anyways, and well, maybe you want to have the editor to have some padding. Let's try this. Well, why not? But you know, again, it's not about the styling itself. It's about showing you how you can use the structure, the correct structure with the right classes on the various elements to style stuff. Okay, well let's go back to the part itself, because we're obviously not done yet. But this one here, let's close this. For viewing purposes, this already comes somewhat close. Maybe it's a good idea to leave this here for now and move to the other location where we want to plug in the same part, but there the part needs to do more, because it needs to present an editor for the various properties, and then we can sort of switch to and fro. So here was the location where the part should appear as well. Edit organization props. Let's go there. I think it was highlighted like this. And let's edit the same part here. So we'll simply call it editor. And synchronize the flow, refresh the page. And again, nothing much happens here because we did not specify any properties. So customer properties was, I think, the location of the metadata, and the properties themselves were kept in organization properties. Yeah. Okay. All right. Well, let's see what happens. I'm refreshing the page, and as you can see, we get the same display here that we got here, which is what we expected. So now I'd like this part here to act not as a viewer but as an editor. So I need to come up with something that allows me to, you know, for instance, set a location and save that. So let's see if we can build this. Obviously, we now need to distinguish between these different modes that this part needs to operate in. So it has a viewer mode and an editor mode. So let's introduce another property. So we have the properties property, we have the definition property, and we have the class property that we added here. And we should now add a mode, local mode, self mode. Let's give it a default mode as well. The default mode is useful for if a modeler, someone who models this flow and plugs this part into her or his flow and does not specify a mode. So in this case, then we're saying, okay, then we're operating in in view mode, not in edit mode. So let's see. So the code here is for the editor. We can probably keep most of this code, but obviously if this part runs in a different mode, this here needs to change. So let's say if we're running in view mode, it needs to do what it already did, and otherwise it needs to come up with something more clever. And so the clever bit probably means that for number and text properties we need to put in a text input. We need to display a text input. And for the enum property, which was the third property, we'd like to have a drop down, so it's easy for the user to pick an entry. And that's what the property role, where the property role comes into play. So I could say if the property role is text, then I'd like to have a text input. Right. If it's a number property, I like to have a text input as well. And for our last choice, the enum property, I'd like to have a drop down. So let's start out simple and simply create the drop down. Let's create a dummy drop down. Let's see what happens. And again, this is to build things incrementally, so we can simply test things as we move along. So options. I think options of values, and I'm not entirely sure anymore how this works. So let's see. Blah 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 blah, etc. Okay. Excuse me. Now we want to see what this does. And obviously, as I've just introduced this mode property, we also need to make sure that we set this mode property in our flow. So here I'm saying, okay, you need to act as an editor or edit mode, whatever. So I'm synchronizing the flow and refreshing the page. Wow, okay. That didn't hurt. This is actually quite nice because I'm already seeing a drop down and I'm seeing the 3 input fields that I wanted to see. So that's good. Yeah, and we can simply move along. The styling's not too bad, so I'm not touching that. I could maybe make this a bit smaller, but I don't care. Let's, for instance, put the right values into the drop down, because these were just some dummy values that I came up with. So the actual values are part of the property definition. Yeah, so let's go back there. and are part of the data field. So so if there's an enum property, I know that the data field holds the values for the dropdown. So let's pick them up. Prop data. Let's safeguard this a bit. So if the data is there, then we want to render the drop down, and otherwise something is really amiss and we forget all about it. So in here I can iterate over the data, over the items, and well, let's put in an item, and this one here, remove this. Well, I think we're already there. Let's see. Press F5. And again, this is really quite easy to do. So we do actually have a drop-down part as a standard part in the Reflexis Flow distribution. But what you see, what hopefully you're seeing right now, that it's very easy to come up with your own part, with your own drop-down inside your part. So this is actually a part that's that dynamically generates its own interface, and does so, in a data-driven way. We're not done yet, but hopefully you see that it's coming along. So one of the things that we really need to do at this point is actually to make sure that the value, because it's an editor, the current values need to be displayed. So let's make that happen, and I'm doing it the simple way right now. I'm adding things in here for the text and number fields. And for the drop down, it needs to be a bit more elaborate, because for the drop down, what we saw earlier, let's go back here, is that sector here is MBO. So obviously what I want to see here is that this is the current selection in the drop down when we get there. So to make that happen, you need to put a selected attribute here for the right option. So one way to go about that is to simply say this, and if the current item, if the item here is equal to our value, then we want the attribute. Otherwise we want nothing, but you don't actually need to specify this bit. So obviously you should not forget the space here. Let's see what happens. Well, everything still compiles, so that must be good. Let's move back here and then go here, and voila. And we could actually check this in the inspector. Oh, here, I should open this one up here. This is usually a good idea to really check that what you think your part generates is also generated. And something that we often do is even take the source of this page, like this bit here, and run it through an HTML validator, just to ensure that whatever you print, whatever you render, is actually, well constructed HTML, because that's actually fairly important. But again, here you can see how our code here, this line here and this bit here, actually make sure that this here happens, and the user sees what you want her to see. Okay, let's move on. At some point I want to type stuff here, level 1, 2, 3, click save, and then and then have this part store all the data that the user has put in the context. So what goes wrong here is that my colleague has actually already added the code to save this, and right now, because I'm not saving anything, it seems that the code expects it under new props. There's an error, but that's okay, because we can now say, well, we want the result to be stored under new props. Let's make sure, update organization props, that goes here. No, it expects them under organization property changes. So that's one thing. So we've actually added a property to specify where the changes should go. And now all we need to do is make sure that our part stores these changes in this particular location. So how can we make this happen? To make this happen, we need to add another method to our part. So if I fold this, you can actually see that we've still been fleshing out the present method. So the present method is the method that runs when the page is generated and the HTML is created and plugged into the page. So this is the result of what the present method does. But as soon as I click one of these buttons, whatever happened here is being processed. So for a Flow application, the basic cycle is when the user interacts with your web application, the flow moves from one step to another, to another, to another, and the parts in each step present themselves, and then afterwards process all the input. So during the present phase, output is generated. During the process phase, all the input is being handled. So, and that's what we need to do for the editor, and that's why we now need to add another method. So, so we add a process method. This, by the way, is pretty much the signature that you need to use for all part properties. There are some slight differences, but most part properties, most part method use this particular signature. And later on, you've already seen this one used. So the self argument is used to access the properties as they're being defined in the flow for this particular part instance. The CTX stands for context, and it's actually a table holding all kinds of settings for the particular flow. So it's a table that you can use, for instance, to read the language or the locale that the flow is running in. But it's also the same table that you can use to perform routing or signal errors and stuff like that. But that's something that we'll probably visit later on in a different session. So for now, I first like to show you how to set up a basic processing method, and maybe at this point it's a nice idea to just simply show that it's being called, because I just told you that if I press this one here, for instance, if I press the cancel button, then the process method will be called, and maybe it's a nice way to, this is a nice way to show that. So I've just started debug view. Let's move this to the side a bit. Here, press F5 so we can see something happens. Here it says presenting, the name of the step. If I now press cancel, it actually says, okay, the step that was presenting itself here is now processing stuff here. And then the new step, so this step here, show organizations, is presenting itself. So this is part of the cycle that I talked about, a minute ago. Like, the step presents itself, then there's some processing. A new step presents itself, there's more processing, etc., etc. And so present and process are two of the basic phases. We call them phases. There are other phases, but we'll get to that later. Okay. But one thing I did not see, oddly enough, is this. And why is that? Oh, I think I did not save the, let's go back. Move this away, clear this, yes, here we are. This is what I wanted to show you. And actually, this is also a good way to debug your parts if you're not entirely sure what's going on. So for the present method, you're actually printing stuff, and everything you print ends up in the page. During processing, there's no print method because you're not creating HTML at that point. So the print debug call in combination with debug view is a good way to see what's going on if you're ever unclear about what is going on. Okay, so what we want to do now is actually read everything that these inputs have collected. And to do that, we first need to make sure that these inputs actually have names, because I've just said it's a text input. There's a select element here. But since they have no names, there's no way to actually access the data that's coming back to us. So that's actually the first thing we need to do. We need to make sure that these inputs have IDs and names. So I can put a name in here. And actually, we need to come up with ideas for all of these. So let's call them element ID. And do the same for name, element ID. Yeah. And we could, yeah. Now, obviously, you need to come up with the right element ID. So the question is, how are we going to name things? So a good way to name stuff is to use this scheme, is to base it of the name of the part itself. So that's something that we could add here. And then we could do, let's take the name of the part, add two underscores, and then use the name of the property, because we need to make sure that for each property in the editor, there's a unique name. And if we would add, you know, this same part, the RM editor part, in different places on the same page, you need to ensure that all the elements have unique IDs still. So this makes sure that happens. Well, things still compile, that's good. Let's refresh the page and see if what we did actually makes sense. Main div, well, this is annoying. Let's go here. It's a bit of a shortcut. Make this a bit larger. And here you see the first select, and here you see that the ID and the name we generated is now part of this here. The same for the location input, same for the level, the niveau input, and lastly the same for the grade input. So this is a prerequisite for us to read anything that I would type into here. So let's type something again, and let's go for A+. Now so at this point here, so let's remove this. Oops, let's remove this. At this point here, I want to read all the data for all the elements that we've generated. So what we need to do is go back to the definition and again use that to access all the information. So we can pretty much use the same loop that we used here. This bit here. And and instead of reading the value from the session context, we want to read the incoming value like this. And I could now do something like editor says this property is something that we see return as this. So this is a very simple, basic, and not at all what we need process method, but again, this is a quick way to see if things work as we expect things to work. So I'm saving this. Oh, something goes wrong here. It actually tells me that this bit here is a global, and that's right because I forgot to read the name of the property. Why is it making this smaller all the time? Not sure. Anyways. Okay, so this should be okay. Let's clear this and press cancel. Well, this is not exactly what I wanted to see. something here is okay, because the 3 is actually the value here, but I'm not seeing the other things. And why is that? I think I forgot to refresh the page. No. Let's do a quick retry. Cancel. No. Okay, what's going on? Inspect elements. For some reason, it does work for the select, but does not work for the inputs, and that's because why is that? To be honest, I have no idea. Let's see. What am I screwing up? Value is empty, type is text. Ah, okay. Ah, of course. Right. Silly me. Yes. So nothing is wrong. This cancel button actually has special behavior. Let's see if we can check this. This cancel button here is defined here. Yes, here it is, and it's specified as a resetting button. So that actually means that if I press cancel, any input that was changed is actually reset and restored. So sorry about that. There's nothing wrong. There's just different behavior between these two buttons. So this button does a simple submit, and the cancel button actually does a full form reset, which is useful in some situations, especially if, for instance, you have a file upload input. Because if you say, okay, I want to upload this file, and then press cancel, you don't want the file to be uploaded anyways, because it may take a long time. And that's why we have this particular property here. So if I would disable it, for instance, I can simply toggle it like this. And now, again, say Nijmegen, niveau 10, grade B minus. Let's reset this and now press. Oh, I should have refreshed the page first. Nijmegen, niveau 10, B minus. Now press cancel. All the data is submitted as well. So, okay, so I'm going to leave this as is. Let's go back to our editor. So now we've confirmed that we can read the incoming values. All that remains for us is to collect them. So I can actually say, okay, let's start out with this result table. Let's remove this one. And then we could say, well, the simplest way to go about it would simply to be something like this. And then use the set function to save the result. So this is actually a very, very short way to save all the results. So here we're reading the result property that we said earlier in, I don't know, I should move here. Oh no, this is not the one we need. This is the viewer one. We need the editor one here. So there's the result property. Not sure why there are two paragraphs here, but okay, it's not important. So this is one way to go about it. Well, we could actually try this out. Why not? This compiles. This I don't need. Let's say Nijmegen again for niveau 10 and then say save. And what you see here is the viewer displays Nijmegen and 10, and it actually messed up the sector because it should have said MBO here, and it actually replaced that with this number. And that's because we've been really, really sloppy in handling this input, because the input needs to be handled differently depending on the role of the property. So that's something that we need to add. And while we do that, we also need to make sure that what we get back is actually what we expect to get back. So, and I'll show you what I mean by that. So in this case, we can say, so for text properties, well, text is text, so we could say, let's safeguard it like this. If it's not a string, then we simply zap it. And because we accept pretty much any text, there's no actual real validation that we can do at this point. But for numbers, obviously it's a different matter. So here we could say value is to number value. Because if the string that we get back, if what we get back is not a number, this would ensure that the value gets set. And finally, if we're dealing with the enumeration property, then, as you could see earlier, what we get back is the value, this here, the value that we've associated with this particular caption. So during rendering we said, okay, we have a number of items and we just number them 1, 2, 3, 4, etc. So if that's what we do during presenting, we need to make sure that during processing we do the reverse. So prop data, and now we can say the value only. So a couple of things. So in our case, we had like 5 or 6 items. You need to make sure that the number that you get back is actually within range. And also you need to make sure that you actually did render some items. So there are several things that you need to check, but a good way to go about it is to do it like this. Because this says I need to have this one here, the value that we got back, it has to be a number. If it wasn't a number, this already fails. We need to have some items and the index that we got needs to be within range of the items. And so this is actually a quick way to do all those checks and also get the caption that we actually wanted to store. And now we could say, okay, if there's still a value here, then we store it, and otherwise, we're not interested. All right. Well, the code still compiles, so it must be good. Let's see what happens. So I'm changing this to RNM. Let's go for level 1, and let's change this to FIO. Save. And there we are. So we're actually, almost there. Well, not completely there, but it's actually doing a lot of the stuff that we wanted it to do. So there's the view mode, where the editor acts as a viewer. There's an editor mode, where suddenly we have like this drop down and editing fields and stuff like that. And the part can process the information, the changes that go back, that it receives. So there are still a couple of things that are missing. And one of the things, maybe things that we could look at here is if I select different organizations here, this one here should update, but it's not. So, and that's something that's actually fairly important, because different organizations can have different properties. And I need to make sure that if the selection in this tree changes, that this will be updated as well. So let's see if we can make that happen. So the first thing you need to do is go to this particular step. Look at the tree. The tree is this one here, I think. Organizations. Here, this is the org tree. And if it changes, then it needs to fetch the properties for this, or for the selected organization, but it also needs to ensure that the viewer will be updated. So the viewer was called props. Maybe I should call it viewer. And then here, viewer. This one needs to be viewer as well. So now I've synchronized the flow. I'm pressing F5. If I now select different organization, nothing's being updated. And that is because we have not added asynchronous support to our part. So that's something that we need to do straight away. And fortunately, it's also very easy to do. And let's add some asynchronous support. So we've seen so far that I've created a present method and I've added a processing method. For asynchronous behavior, you need to add a respond method. So again, methods usually have this signature, and for this part, the only thing that it needs to do is it actually has to re-render itself, at least in viewer mode. Unfortunately, we've put all the rendering stuff inside the present method. So we could maybe say, okay, present yourself again. Excuse me. But this is not a good way to go about it. So it's a better way to do it is to actually say, okay, let's isolate the rendering stuff here. So I'm renaming the present method to the render method. But there's one more thing that I need to do now. I need to, well, first of all, I need to reintroduce the present method. Then I want it to call the render method. And when the part renders itself, it needs to be rendered inside a container that can be located in the page. So the stuff I did here, I'm taking this here out and putting it in here. And that's what's true for this as well. Yeah. And now I need to make sure that this container div is actually something that can be found, and this is how you make that happen. So I've now made sure that there's a div with a specific name based on this part. So the part is called, this is the name of the part, and this is the prefix that you need for the C div, the container div. And this allows us to, this is the final piece of the puzzle, to say, okay, whenever there's a refresh verb, I want the platform to call the respond method. So this actually instructs Flow that whenever whenever the part needs to be refreshed, it may call this respond method. So the present method renders the container, then calls the actual rendering code, which does exactly what we've already specified. And then it says, okay, I can act asynchronously, and that's why the respond method is here. Okay, let's see. Okay, I made a mistake. Right, I've taken out the name again. Okay. Right, let's see what happens. Well, again, nothing seems to happen right now, but which is a bit silly. But that's actually a bit confusing because whatever properties in this system, in this web application, properties that are defined for an organization are actually inherited by a sub-organization. So what I actually need to do is take a sub-organization and then change that. So, level 2, save that. And now we see the changes here, and if I go to another one, you can see that it actually updates. So actually anything that's specified here will be visible for these organizations as well. And I can take this department and say, okay, this is a different level and it's grade A+. Oh, the A+ is not appearing. What's going on? Ah, right. The grade was a number. So I'm doing 1, 2, 3. So now it appears. Well, obviously, so that's actually a good. So what? Well, let's rewind a bit. So what you see now is I've taken a part that had purely synchronous behavior, like only a present method and a processing method, and I've added some very, very basic asynchronous behavior, and the only behavior that we've added is we've allowed the part to update itself when it's being instructed to do so. So that's for the viewer. But for the editing bit, what we just saw is actually an interesting bit. I've put in A+, but grade, as you may remember, is a number property, not a text property. So A+ is not a number. So if I press save here, it is being zapped, so it's being cleared, but the part does not provide the user with any feedback. What I actually wanted to do is actually say, hey, you've actually entered something here and that's not something that we can accept. But that's something that I'd like to leave for the next session, because this session has gone on long enough and there's a lot of other stuff that we need to discuss as well. Because there are security issues involved, and it's probably good to reserve a second session where we finish this particular part that we've just created. How many lines are there? So there's not even 100 lines, but it's actually a fairly a fairly dynamic part. Again, that we've built incrementally, yes, that we've tested interactively, and that's actually being somewhat data driven. It reads some metadata, then takes some data and combines the two to come up with a dynamic interface. But like I said, this is not a part that is suitable for production because of some security issues, and obviously because of some functional issues, like the missing feedback if I put in a non-number in a number field. So let's pick it up in the next session, and I hope to see you there. So thanks for watching.